All right. Good morning, everyone. I've got 9:05 according to my little computer clock in the bottom corner. So I think we will go ahead and begin, knowing that folks will probably keep hopping on and joining us throughout the morning, which is wonderful. So we just want to welcome you. My name is Megan Jones. I know some of you. I don't know all of you. I'm going to lean on the I'm the newest CBI team member thing for a little longer because all of my colleagues have been part of the CBI family for so long that I feel like I embrace that there are faces that I haven't yet met, and so I'm excited to be here today. On behalf of everyone at CBI, we want to welcome you to this morning's event entitled Creating Home. And from the first time we heard Hannah Hassan's poem called Fault Lines, which she wrote for our stakeholders breakfast back in December, we knew it couldn't help but spark ongoing conversation. But it's really taken on a life of its own. And so we're excited to take the time today to talk more about it, especially in the context of April, which is National Fair Housing Month. So when we talk about housing and homes, for a lot of us, I think our default is to kind of start from our headspace and from a place of logic and reason and all of that. But Hannah's poem really strikes me because it starts from the heart. And so we encourage you all during our time together this morning to let this poem in our conversation sort of start and stay in your heart place as well, as much as you can. And with that, I think I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic to my colleague, Christy, who's going to give us a little more context around our ongoing theme of fault lines, which started back at our stakeholders breakfast back in December, but has really carried us forward all these months later for conversations like this. So Christy, take it away.
Good morning, everyone. I am so excited to see all these names and faces on the screen from all across CBI's history, folks who were some of the first people I met when I first started at CBI a very long time ago, and to some of our newer friends. So as Megan said, we're really grateful to have you all with us. And what I thought I would do is just give you a little reminder of what we actually mean when we use the phrase fault lines. As Megan said, this was part of our theme with our December stakeholders breakfast. And as many of you who know CBI well will know, we really like to test things out. And so for the last few months, we've really been testing out this idea of fault lines as a more accessible way for us to talk about equity and equity issues and what those look like and what they mean for us here in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. So geologically, fault lines, as we all know, are these structures or rifts that exist in the ground. And we probably are not even aware that they exist until the stress or the friction becomes too great. And then suddenly we start to feel that little tremor. And we really believe that it was no accident that we actually had an earthquake here in North Carolina last August. So that's why we decided to build on this idea. So geologically, we all have an understanding of what fault lines mean, but there are also, we believe, social fault lines, and there are structures, experiences, intentions that are in the ground, and we walk around on those as well. And some of us, based on our identity or lived experience, may not be aware of some or all of them, but they're there and they exist. And in the same way, a geological fault line can create an earthquake. A social fault line can also produce tremors and convulsions that can suddenly wake us up and get our attention. And so CBI has been really looking at how fault lines can become more obvious to us, how we can become more skilled at acknowledging some things that maybe we didn't realize were there, and also support ourselves and each other to become more skilled in how we assess and analyze and act to make sure that those fault lines don't produce unbridgeable divides in our community. So we are here today to primarily hear from our dear friend, Hannah Hassan, but we also encourage you throughout the morning to really think about what are the fault lines that you've seen or experienced in your life. And we certainly, of course, know that housing can be a big fault line here in Charlotte, depending on where you're situated. So I am going to turn over the mic to my colleague, Annetta Ford, who's going to get us started.
Thanks, Christy. Good morning again, everybody. So glad that you're with us. As Christy said, my name is Annetta Ford, and I have the privilege of working with the ladies of CBI, Community Building Initiative. Before I introduce Hannah, I would like to mention to you all that please feel free to use the chat feature for any questions or comments that you may have throughout the morning. I have gone ahead and added some things to the chat feature by way of resources and how you can make contact with us. So with that, I would like to introduce Hannah Hassan. For those of you who don't know Hannah as intimately as we have the privilege of knowing her, Hannah Hassan was named 2020's Best Creative by Q City Nerve. Hannah is a highly acclaimed spoken word poet and storyteller. Hannah believes that stories set us free. And the themes of some of her work is home. It is social justice, it is racial justice, it's women's rights, and so many more topics. Hannah writes and performs work in Charlotte and throughout the United States. And we are so glad to have her with us this morning. The other thing that I will add is that in 2018, Hannah, along with her sister Sade, started what is now known as Epoch Tribe. Hannah has a specialized talent in creating a safe and brave space for the audiences to perform in and to speak their truth in, and we're grateful for that. Hannah is a graduate of North Carolina A&T, Aggie Pride, for anybody who's on the line. Hannah lives in Charlotte, of course, with her husband, Jamal, and we'll give him a shout out because his birthday was yesterday. So happy birthday, Jamal. And Hannah was inducted into the CBI family by way of our Community Building Initiative Leaders Under 40 Class 6. And we just couldn't let her go. So with that, I would like to introduce to you Hannah Hassan.
Thank you, Annetta. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Christy. Thank you, Diane English. I love CBI. I speak about CBI often because it was one of the best experiences that I've had in Charlotte for many reasons. And so I always will welcome any opportunity to get involved with, to share time and space with, to give my art to this organization because I believe in the people and in the work. So something a lot of people, maybe some people don't know about me is that I am obsessed with weather, right? Like it's a little borderline ridiculous. I probably could never have been a weather woman because I don't know that I could have passed some of those science classes. But anytime that there's a major weather event going on, I can watch the Weather Channel for hours. Some people know the names of like CNN anchors. I know those too, but I also know the names of like my favorite Weather Channel people. Jim Cantori, if anyone's wondering, he's like such a beast. Like Jim Cantori is outside with the umbrella in his hand with the hurricane. Like he's doing all the work. This is an obsession I've had since I was young. So when the theme of fault lines was sort of placed on my desk, I got a little bit excited because it's attached to like a weather pattern, correct? And then I realized, like, I don't know a lot about earthquakes. So before I could even begin to wrap my head around what the poem would be for the CBI breakfast, I had to understand the theme. So I did a lot of research, deep conversations that was specifically just about fault lines and what they are, where they exist, the scientific stuff, not the fun stuff, which I don't know that any of this is fun, but I had to gain an understanding of what a fault line is from the weather pattern perspective. And then after I felt like I had a pretty good understanding of that, I needed to make the switch to understanding that from the lens of our communities and social justice and racial justice. And then I became overwhelmed because I started thinking about the fault lines in Charlotte. And I was like, obviously, you know, there's the fault line of racism. And then when you dig under that, there's the fault line of slavery and the enslavement of, and then it just kept going. There's food security, there's healthcare issues, there's COVID, like, and how it like disproportionately affects Black and brown and low income communities. And all of these things kept piling up, and I became overwhelmed because I needed to have a direction for the piece, but all of the things overwhelmed me, and I really began to feel like I want this poem to be great. I want it to be something that can really give back to CBI in the way that CBI has given back to me. I want it to honor the place that we're in now. And at that time, it was 2020. And you all know where we were 2020. We're not far removed from that, a lot of that in 2021. But I mean, we were literally in the middle of a storm. And so I struggled a lot. And then I had a meeting with Annetta just to touch base about the piece. And she shared with me that in addition to my poem for the breakfast, there would be some interviews that would be shared from some of our Charlotte-based leaders. One of those was Mr. Ford. Well, give me his first name. I'm not sure why it's escaping me.
James Ford.
James Ford, yes. And so she said, I can send you a snippet of that if you like. And she sent me a snippet of the interview, and James was talking about home and Charlotte's housing home crisis. And, you know, it just, that poured over me. Many of you might know that I produce with my sister Sade for Epoch Tribe a lot of storytelling shows that tell the stories of communities that are facing and have faced displacement. I'm always commissioned to do poems that center home and different communities in Charlotte and around the country. Every time my work goes back to home, it is the prescription that has been prescribed over my life at this juncture in my life. And I don't know why, when I first started it, this process in my head, that didn't land on me, but I got there. After I heard James's interview, I knew, like, right now, there's no way we can talk about the fault lines, the social fault lines that exist in Charlotte without covering the stories of home. And because the writing is on the wall here with many of the communities that are deep in displacement, gentrification, being forced out because of things like their proximity to uptown, tax prices being raised, people being able to work in the city but not being able to afford to live there. All of that began to set on me. Those are the fault lines I want to discuss for this piece. And I started to think about some of the communities that I have written stories for and shared time and space in, like the Enderley Park community, like the Optimist Park community, and some of the ones that are in my family's history and all those things. But I knew there's no way that I could even begin to name or think of all of the different, especially historically Black communities that have experienced or are experiencing displacement in this city. So I went to my friend's Facebook and I put up a quick post because I was thinking a couple of people can help me out here. And I said, can you all tell me just by name, some of the historically Black communities that have or are facing displacement in this city. It was one of the most commented on posts I think I've ever made. I mean, neighborhoods that I had never heard of, that I sure didn't know the history of. I still don't know the history of some of them because there are too many to name. And this conversation brewed, and all of these people began to talk about and share stories about their communities. Did you know that, not only my mom, but my grandmother and my great grandmother lived there? And then there's this pattern that emerged of people who have faced multiple displacements. So maybe they lived in the Brooklyn community and then at some point Cherry, and now like Enderley Park, and have watched all of those. And it was really humbling for me to share that with the community. And I knew that that was the approach that I would take to this poem. So this poem is an acknowledgement of what fault lines are. And then it is a look at fault lines through the lens of home. As housing feels like such a sterile term. It's home. And it is a love letter to our community. It's to say to folks, like, I could not include all of the neighborhoods in here because the poem's already long enough, but I see you. We see each other. Our stories matter. They're important. They're our history. They are our legacy, and we're going to keep speaking them as much of a chance as we get. That is this poem. When I performed it, I felt the energy around me, and the follow-up has continued to be something that has been amazing. So many people from many different backgrounds contact me often about this poem, and I am happy to share it with you all today. And it's literally just called Fault Lines. All right. We have all shared the stories, spoken the words about the communities, the neighborhoods that once were Brooklyn, the people who are actively being displaced, Cherry. We harp on the memories, give love and light to their legacies. We prepare for the catastrophe that almost always comes with being erased. A fault is a fracture or disruption in the planet's surface. It's where the movement and displacement occurs. A fault line holds on to the pressure. It's holding everything together until the tension becomes so great that it literally rocks the earth, causes a convulsion, an earthquake, a tsunami, a disaster of grave proportions. It's the tiny cracks that form lines of division that create the disasters that result in disruption. And we speak their stories, tell the tales of the people and the families that once occupied this land, Catawba, Sugaree, name whole towns after them, Waxhaw, and roads and streets, Tuckasegee. We wade in their waters, Sugar Creek, have benefited from their traditions, a good old Southern city where the living is easy. We forge forward in the name of urban renewal with trains and tracks that slice through entire neighborhoods, Optimist Park, that displace whole families and generations of people who have lived and worked there, Enderley Park. We uproot stories and history without a second thought of the experiences and memories created by the people who built their communities with creativity and care, Wilmore. And every time the people are erased, Brook Hill, families are left out in the cold Biddleville, beneath the surface Lockwood, beyond the visible Smallwood, a crack is exposed. The plates begin to shift. Nature is taking its course. You cannot think that you can disregard the most vulnerable yet resilient of your city and not be met with a catastrophic force, and not come to face with the consequences of your actions. When what is in the ground can stay there no more, the people erupt, movements happen, perspectives shift, cities shake, lives are changed, and earths will quake. We speak their stories. discuss with candor how they can no longer afford to live there now, Noda, about how their homes are purchased for pennies and torn down and rebuilt, First Ward. Turn what meant something valuable to somebody's grandma, Greer Heights, into condos and townhomes, $500,000 build, Seversville. Disregard the irony of stripping yet another people from their home. Another crack reveals itself from beneath the surface. Another Black community erased and displaced. A city with a crisis of consciousness. Another neighborhood goes up for purchase. Another family out on the streets, ousted to the outskirts of the city or to the places without access. Now, those who can afford it are privileged to live in the ugly houses turned to pretty, the fault lines exposed. What a beautiful mess. We tell the stories of the city as we work for better days and respond with hope and courage. We fight injustice, but we cannot ignore the cracks that have always existed beneath the surface. And if we are to prevent greater disaster, if we are to save our communities while there is still time, we must go back to the difficult truths that exist beneath us. We must follow the stories through the fault lines. So we wanted to just hold a moment of space for the stories, for the people, for the communities that we've mentioned here, and just give me a chance and you all a chance to take a deep breath. Okay, today we will talk back. I will talk to some of the CBI team about their experiences with this piece. We will give you a chance, our audience and friends, to ask questions of me if you have them. We will give you a chance to talk about some of your experiences with home. This will be a rich conversation. The goal here is to build community through shared stories. That's always my goal. And I want to remind you that there is a sacred space when sitting and experiencing the stories of others, especially when those stories are about home. There's just something so magical about that. So I invite you to take deep breaths while you listen, to open up your heart and your minds. And I invite anytime anyone is speaking and sharing a story to speak from the I perspective. And because we don't, have all morning together, we ask you to keep those stories and comments concise. And we're going to model that and start with our friends from CBI. You're going to hear short, just a couple of minute stories from Megan, from Annetta, from Christy about their experiences with this piece. And then we're going to go from there. So I want to create space for each of them to just share. So Megan Jones, I'm going to pull you to the stage and we'll start with you.
All right. So I'm not a native Charlottean. I moved here at 29 in 2013. I think my math's right. So I first came to know a lot of the neighborhoods you mentioned in the poem after a lot of the people who had lived there had already begun to be displaced. I realized now that sort of demographically, I'm a lot like the people that those who are redeveloping neighborhoods are probably trying to help attract. And I remember a night shortly after I moved to Charlotte, I was driving to a brewery in South End from I-77 along Remount Road. Past the houses of Brook Hill, I was kind of startled by how much attention the buildings seemed to need, even though it was clear that people were still living there. It was kind of shocking to me how close that neighborhood was to the bustling South Boulevard bars and restaurants I was heading to, and it sort of felt like two worlds butting up against each other. A few years after that, I had a job for a while that gave me the opportunity to meet and work with some of the leaders from the Brook Hill neighborhood. And frankly, when I got there, I kind of felt a little bit out of my depth. I wondered what I could contribute beyond kind of bringing the stories of the people I met back and sharing them with the circles that I ran in. But I was really blown away by the love and the grace and the patience that everyone I was meeting was really showing me. Especially when looking back on kind of my first reaction to seeing that neighborhood and wondering what its history had been and who lived there and all of that. So when I heard the poem Fault Lines, that was really what struck me. Those faces of the people that I had come to know in Brook Hill were in my head. People like Debbie and Selma and Pat and Valerie and others who had really experienced the impact of those fault lines we were talking about firsthand. And it reminded me of the stories they had trusted me with. Of kids playing, of neighbors looking out for one another, and how that place, that had seemed eerie and kind of startled me at first, had really also held so much love and hope the whole time. And so that was my first encounter with the poem.
Thank you so much, Megan. All right, we're going to ask Anetta to share.
Okay. Well, when I first heard the poem, it did to me what it continues to do each time. It makes me so emotional. I am a native Charlottean, and so Charlotte is home. When I think about the poem and I listen to it, I think about, my mind suddenly immediately went back to even growing up in Brook Hill and not understanding until I got older the displacement and why it meant so much even when we lived there, why people were so united and more than neighbors. When we moved away from Brook Hill, our family was fortunate enough to be able to purchase a home in Seversville. And so when I hear the poem and you do the line of the $500,000 bills, that's literally what our street looks like. We still own our home and we will always own it. That's home for us. And it's home because that's where I learned what a sense of community was. Because everybody looked out for each other. Everybody was neighborly. That's where I learned what that word meant. Our neighbors growing up were single parent households, 2-parent households. They were Black people, they were white people. They were the people that you would want to live in community with. And we all looked out for each other. And so that's where I learned, that skill. And so when I hear that poem, it takes me completely to that place.
Oh, thank you, Anetta. I can see in the chat someone said that they can definitely relate. I know there's lots of people who can. All right, Christy, we'll ask you to share and then we'll talk about it all. You're muted, Christy.
Come on, there we go. I am not a Charlotte native. I have been here since 1997, but Charlotte is my home. And I think I'm actually going to start with the first time I heard the poem and work backward a little bit. The first time I heard the Fault Lines poem shortly before our breakfast, where I come from, we say chill bumps. I just got chill bumps all down my back. It felt to me so much like the Say Her Name movement that sprung up after Breonna Taylor was murdered. And so it felt so important to me that through your poem, Hannah, CBI was having an opportunity to say the names of these communities, communities where people were born and died and got married and had their children and learned to ride a bike, played with their dogs, or ran through the sprinklers. And that's what sat with me, was how important it is to still use the names of these communities and what they mean to Charlotte's history and to Charlotte's ultimate success. And so even today, here in the poem again, I think I'm just filled with such a sense of gratitude that because I've had the opportunity to live in Charlotte for as long as I have, and I've had the opportunity to really learn about Charlotte's history and what's in the ground here, I'm able to appreciate the poem in a whole different way. And so I really commend to everyone to take the opportunity to learn about the places that Hannah mentioned in the poem that you might not know, to drive to the grocery store a different way, to think about the places you spend your money, to think about the things you tell your children about neighborhood and home and community and what those things mean. So thank you, Hannah.
Thank you, Megan, Annetta, and Christy. For those of all who are joining us, I have shared sort of the story behind the poem and the poem. And then we asked Annetta and Megan and Christy to share their stories of their experiences with this piece and what it has meant for them. Because it's important for me I'm inside of the poem because I wrote it and perform it. And I know the things that, sometimes, I'll see people respond on a Zoom chat or something like that. But from the point of view of the artist, it's important for me to hear the impact from real people who experience it often, because it makes me know whether or not I'm creating something that matters and that lands and all of those things. Annetta, I was really struck by essentially the fact that you, like a lot of especially Black people who are native to Charlotte, who have lived a little bit of time, have stories of multiple experiences with communities that have experienced displacement. So even though y'all will not be moved and you're staying where you are now, you do see the changes that are happening around you. What has it been like, that duality, to have existed in multiple places of displacement?
Oh wow. Seeing the changes that have occurred, I think for me, because I am a native Charlatan, anytime I see change occurring, whether it is in the Seversville community or Charlotte at large, it is all, my mind just automatically rolls back to what I remember it looking like. And so for Seversville, um, I mean, that we do the bus tours at CBI, and so going through Seversville is on our route. And so we always go down the street where my family home is. And we've done the bus tour for 11 years now. And Dr. Tom Hanchett, who is the bus tour partner, we always talk about we should have documented from day one to now, because it's like every week, I'm there every week, and there's so much change going on that I see from week to week. And so it is, what it feels like is, I always go back to that phrase, sense of community, because I wonder, the people that are moving in, whether it's, good for the neighborhood, bad for the neighborhood, enhancing the property values, all of that. Are you there because you want a sense of community for you and your family, or are you there for the dollar bills, bills, that is gained from that? And I think it's a both and, because I have spent time in the Smallwood and Seversville community, talking to people to ask them that question, like, why are you here? Because I want to understand. And if I want to keep using the word neighbor, and I want to keep using the phrase sense of community, I need to know who you are, and I want you to know who I am. Even from a historical standpoint of sharing with the new neighbors what we had before and how we can keep that going.
Mm.
So I don't know if that answers your question exactly, but it's a both and for me.
Yeah. Yeah, it answers my question. I just really wanted to hear about sort of the emotional experience of what that can feel like. Thank you, Annetta, Megan, and Christy. I wanted to move and create space for all of our other friends who are with us. I wanted to open the floor to ask if you have any questions of me or of Megan or Christy or Annetta after what you have heard or experienced thus far. Feel free to write that question in the chat if you're joining us on Zoom. If you're on Facebook, you can maybe write it in the comments, and we'll try to get to it if you have any questions. Or you can unmute yourself and ask. But I wanted to hold space right now for the audience. If you just have any questions about the poem, about the piece, about any of the creative process, or for any of the ladies who just spoke.
Hannah, before anybody does that, I do want to share that in the chat there are so many very beautiful thank yous and acknowledgments to you about how powerful and truthful and beautiful and incredible you are as a gift, and this poem is. So I just wanted you to, I know that you'll see it later, but I wanted you to know that that is what precedes anything that we'll hear.
Well, thank you for acknowledging that. And thank you all for those comments. I love that I get to do this work. And so it makes it a little easy sometimes to be able to do it. So there's that. All right, I'm going to move over and create space. All right, we'll start with Steph asked a question in the chat. I'm curious about the other meaning of fault and how it works within the poem. I interpret it in a certain way, but curious about how y'all saw it. Steph, I would need a little more clarity. Are you talking about fault as in like the people who are at fault? Is that, are you willing to unmute yourself? As in blame accountability.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, no
Sorry
problem.
about that.
Please go ahead, speak.
I'm here. Yes, I heard so loudly within the poem, even though it was and in your discussion where you were talking about earthquakes and the weather part of fault, I still heard that other meaning of fault, and I felt it. And I'm sort of dealing with that right now in terms of who's at fault, who's to blame, where's the accountability in all of this? And I'm just wondering if that echoed for anyone else hearing this, or in writing the poem, or in choosing that phrase.
Thank you, Steph. And there's Kathleen is in the chat. She said she saw the same thing. That's interesting. That's the first time I've even thought about that. When from the perspective of writing and creating this poem, I didn't do it centering who was at fault. I mean, I think many of us can point to some of the systems and the people and what is in our ground that has created and caused all of this. There's this experience that I have when telling stories specifically that center Black communities and our experiences. It's finding the balance of speaking truth about much of the pain that we carry because of our history in this country. Um, and also not making the totality of our experiences about pain. And when I write from a lens of who is at fault, then that makes victims, not victors, out of us, at least from my standpoint. So when I am telling the stories of our communities, even though sometimes it might hit you right in that gut place, it's uncomfortable to hear, I'm also centering our joy. You know, I grew up in a Black community, and it was underinvested. Our now that I think about it, we lived in a food, I don't know if we're using the term food desert still, but like there was not a grocery store for quite a while. Of course, we can talk about healthcare disparities and all of those other things, and yet and still, like, kids were outside playing until the street lights came on. We knew our neighbors. I had a neighbor who lived within vicinity of us who I didn't even learn until I was in high school. Most of the time didn't have lights, which is why they were over at our house doing homework and stuff. Like, those are our stories too. So when we say that we're trying to preserve our communities and experiences, we want access to healthcare and that benefits and fits us, and food and healthy things and good schools and all those other things. But we also want to preserve some of those things that really exist within our culture. So I'm not saying that it's not there, that sort of concept of there being someone, some groups, some things at fault, but that was not my initial approach to this. That's the good thing about art, though, you know? So Maya said, may she speak next? Of course. Maya, I see you. Will you unmute yourself?
Hi, Hannah. So nice to meet you.
You
I just
too.
absolutely love you since the first time I heard your poem. Sorry, emotions are still overtaking me from hearing you the second time. But hearing your poem, it took me back to my childhood. I grew up in Raleigh, North Carolina on the South Side. And we know for Black communities in cities like the South Side, it's usually considered like the hood or like the low income areas. I just thought about like Anetta and how I could relate to her in our neighborhood. Like, we had a sense of community. All of the families like took care of each other's kids or like knew who you belonged to. But to your point about the having to be in by the streetlights, like that took me like back, because it's like our warning, like we have to get in the house. And it took me back to like history in the sundown towns. And I feel like a part of that streetlight system within our Black communities have to do with that, and it stemmed from that. And just thinking about as a kid having to be bused 30 minutes outside of Raleigh to Apex to go to like a predominantly white school, and not having a sense of identity. Sorry. Away from like the community that I lived in, like I had to try to like find my place in schools. I don't know. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cry. Like, I wasn't supposed to cry, but this is heavy, and I'm acknowledging that it's heavy. I'm acknowledging that everything that's happening in the world, and Christy bringing up Breonna Taylor, is heavy. I am Breonna Taylor. I live for Breonna Taylor. I advocate for her, and that doesn't go unnoticed. Her murderers have not been held accountable. And there's barely any accountability for what happens to our people. Derek Chauvin is just a step of accountability, it's not justice. And I just want to speak that truth, because justice is dismantling the system that has robbed my world and my ancestors who I live for. The generational trauma that I have to live with every single day. because of the fabric that this country was built on and stitched in. Like, we have to live with that. So I just want to send myself peace and love in this moment. I want to send each of you peace and love in this moment, and strength and positivity. And thank you for hearing my truth and hearing my story.
Maya, thank you. You don't ever have to apologize in my presence, I think, or any of ours, for feeling what you need to feel and saying those things. We honor the words that you just spoke. We honor your vulnerability, and many of us stand in it, and we are mirrors for each other. That's a big part of what this is all about. Sade said in the chat, another one of the consequences of displacement is that in the process, the places that were our havens become dangerous for us in many different ways. And they become unfamiliar to us. And when you take away people's roots, like if you were to pull a tree out from the roots, you no longer have the tree. I mean, that's just it. There is a sense of sort of floating out here. So your vulnerability, but just your truth is honored this morning in this space. Thank you so much, Maya.
Thank you
And
so much.
Hannah, and I would like to say, especially to you, Maya, I think that, this is just kind of proof positive that, words are powerful, words do matter. And I think, I wasn't supposed to cry this morning either, Maya, just so you know. It was not going to happen, but yet it did because, the power in the words that take us back to trigger the things that are our everydayness.
Mm-hmm.
That is heavy. And, while we acknowledge that, those are the things that weigh on us, then we also have to figure out, for ourselves, how do we live in it and how do we keep being productive in it? And, where are we in the stories that others tell as well as the ones that we tell about ourselves?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I always think about like, how do we function every day when things are constantly happening like to our people, and we have to see it and we have to listen to it and we have to read about it in the news every single day. And it's like, how do you function like that? Like, how do I not have PTSD like when I hear like another like a shooting happened in Charlotte a few weeks ago, and I texted my little brother because like he's not, you don't have to be a certain way for the police to like target you. It's just the skin that we're in. And I'm aware of that. So knowing like who my brother is and that he does not put himself in situations to be targeted, like I know that that doesn't matter. So when I hear like things happening, like I have to reach out to him. I have to make sure it's not him. And it's sad that we have to live that way.
Thank you, Maya.
Thank you, Maya. I want to honor Tom's questions
Yes.
in the chat.
Yes.
But what I'm gonna do is we're gonna come back around to that because it's very loaded, and I'm gonna give Audra. So Tom, I want you to know I see it. I see you. We're gonna come back. Audra said she would like to offer some thoughts, so I want to create space for her real quick.
Thank you so much, Hannah. I really appreciate it. And I'm actually going to give Tom a segue, so this is perfect. Thank you all for sharing. Also really honored to be in this space with you right now and to be able to share in your truths with you. One of the things that struck me about living in Charlotte is I'm not from here like a lot of us. I've lived in other really big cities. I've lived in neighborhoods that were about to be gentrified and that were being gentrified. And what strikes me is, I would live in those neighborhoods and then I might move away, come back a few years later, and you would see some changes, or you would see, not that substantial of amount of change, but change is happening. Here, the speed and the intensity of this is like a freight train. And like Annetta referenced, weekly in Seversville, it feels like daily sometimes to me. And a lot of the neighborhoods are dissected by these train tracks too. And so it's like that sound of the train tracks or the sounds of these trains going through. And Hannah, the cadence in which you deliver the poem and the way you drop the names of the neighborhoods in gives me that same that impression of that freight train moving forward. It's just going to keep moving forward. So that's just some feedback on that. And then whenever I hear the poem, all I can think about is what do we do? How do we keep these neighborhoods, the memories of these neighborhoods? How do we honor the histories of these neighborhoods and keep it alive? And I know, Hannah, you're doing some work with recording oral histories and stuff, but and then beyond that, from a policy perspective, because Tom and I have had this discussion before when I first moved to Charlotte a few years ago. Like, how do we make these changes, like from a policy perspective too? So that was my loaded comment. It was too much to type in the chat. Thank you all so much.
No, it wasn't loaded. Well, it is loaded, but and needed. Thank you, Audra. I want to just acknowledge the part about the cadence of the piece. Again, that's not something that I had made the connection with the way that it reads and how that reflects sort of the intensity and speed at which communities are changing. But thank you for noticing and seeing that. That's interesting. So yes, so Audra did tee up Tom's question really well. So we'll go straight into that, which was, what is a policy solution to displacement? Should people, usually white, not Black, move into Black neighborhoods? Should the communities be made historic so they are harder to tear down? Should policy work on raising incomes? Should the more subsidized rental, should we do the more subsidized rental? I think maybe he's asking, and just wondering what ideas folks have for solutions. Thank you, Tom, for creating a whole entire another webinar. But no, those are the questions that are wrapped in pieces like this, and really that entire breakfast for CBI. Like, it's reaching things from, we're using art and community engagement to approach things from the emotional standpoint. But there, I believe, are actual tangible policy oriented things that can be done. I think that my concern is getting into a conversation that goes straight down the road of all of the political stuff, especially happening in Charlotte with the 2040 plan and things of that nature.
Yes.
If anyone has a concise way they might like to answer or approach this, I would welcome you to it, but I don't have anything that I can say concise to this right now. I will say this, I am doing stories right now in the Optimist Park community with folks who have lived in a community that was built, much of it was the homes that they're in were built by a sitting president. And many of those homes are being sold and torn down right now as we speak. A lot of that entire community looks like a construction zone. And there's a lot of beautiful, rich history there. But I guess the land is more valuable than the homes because of where it's located, because of transportation, because of a lot of different things. And I believe that there were things that could have been done before much of this happened from a political standpoint. And I think that's probably the story in a lot of communities. But I know, Annetta, you were about to jump in. If anybody knows politics here, you do. So go.
No. I was just going to suggest that, for those of us that know Tom Warshauer, we know that he is very much a thinker. And I think that the questions that he posed in the chat would make a great webinar. That would be a whole nother session on its own. But I think it's also food for thought. I think that the questions are reflective for all of us. And it still goes back to, the use of power in the solutions, the perceived power that we think we have or that we do have, and how we use it and can use it for some of these things, especially around policy, because policy does make changes. But I think that these are very much questions that that we can ponder on and have a whole nother conversation.
Yes, absolutely. Steph said, want to suggest that Mylon's ancestors had an approach and solution with creating ACDC. Yeah, I think that there are quite a few things that are already been done here and in other cities by people, by groups that can be modeled. Yes, I'm gonna leave that right there for now. I want to just in honor and time open one other question, which is open to anyone to answer. I want to know, what does it mean to create home for you? As we think about home here in Charlotte or wherever you might be, I'm not going to presume everyone here is in Charlotte. I want to just ask for you to take a moment to think about, to ponder on, what does it mean for you to create home? How have you done that in the past? How are you continuing to do it? Think about that for a second, and then if a few folks want to share, we can do that. All right. So I just wanted you to take a second, think about what creating home means for you. And I just wanted to offer an opportunity if anyone wanted to share just in like a few sentences what that might be for them. And you can either put in the chat or just unmute yourself.
I'll unmute myself for 1 second. This is Tom Warshower.
Okay, Tom.
It's been really fascinating to hear all the discussions. And I think what home means to me is just a place I feel I belong. And I know when neighborhoods change in terms of their character, their characteristics, their cost, it makes a lot of people feel that they no longer belong where they've lived for 10 years or lived for generations. And it's just feeling like the Cheers moment on television, that your neighbors have your back. You're in a place that you feel like you belong, and I think that building that community is hard, and then maintaining that over time is also really hard. So I really do appreciate the discussion, but that's what home means to me.
Thank you, Tom. I love that, the Cheers moment. And I think that's what Maya is saying in the chat. She says, I feel like home does not have to be a concrete place. I am my own home. And wherever I take my love and share space with people that I love and care for, that moment is creating home. That's absolutely beautiful.
Could I share?
Please.
My name's Liz, and I think my perspective is skewed a little bit because I work in affordable housing, and I'm constantly thinking about what does that physical home place mean to me. And when I think about what does home mean, I think about where's a safe place where I can be me, where I can be with my family, where I can be with my friends, and where I can be by myself to rest, recharge, and also a place where I can make memories. But I think that resting and recharging is very important to me because that affects how I go out and perform in the world and go be part of my job and be part of other things. And having that safe place where I can get that rest is so critical to being healthy. And so I think people being able to find that space where they feel that safety and that feel that comfort and can find peace is really important to overall just health, and that affects the community and being a part of, being able to feel connected to those around them.
Oh, thank you, Liz. I love that. The thought of being connected, connection to me is such a big part of home. I think that's what I'm hearing also echoed in the chat. Mylan says, to me, creating home means putting the community first over politics, special interests, and those disconnected from the issues that affect your fellow neighbors. I conceptualize it as home already been created. We are structured by our ancestors and foregoers. It's our responsibility to upkeep and be good stewards of home. And then Alicia said, creating home, being from other places, is the aspiration of being fully welcomed, appreciated, respected, and included. Oh, all beautiful things. And then if anybody else wants to share.
This is Arisa. I'd like to share.
Okay.
It's so good to see so many of my friends and folks who've been doing work in community. So when you asked that question, the first thing I thought of was the song from, from The Wiz, Home. You know, when I think of home, I think of a place where there's love overflowing. So I think of community, I think of family, I think of a connection. And many of you know I worked over 8 years with the city of Charlotte in these very neighborhoods, you know, with Mr. Pruitt in Seversville, you know, with many of the folks who have passed on, but in my heart and my mind, their legacy lives on. And so when I think of home, I think of history and I think of people. And I really do feel for those who are feeling a sense of displacement or just a sense of sadness about shifts in these communities. But when I think of home, I think of people, love, and community.
Oh, Arisa, like I love that. Like people, love, and community. What a beautiful summation. I will say, y'all, when she said that song at the beginning, it made me think of another way that this poem came to fruition. I created a home playlist of different songs that center home, like everywhere from country to folk to hip hop to R&B, all of these beautiful historical and new and whatever songs. And I went out and walked around my neighborhood and then came back in and wrote and went to the shower and heard those songs. Like there's something about other art that conjures up something, that brought me joy. I think
Share the playlist.
You said drop that playlist? Yeah, I will. Challenge accepted. I'm gonna put it on my Facebook.
Okay.
Yeah, you'll see another side of me. Tamara, were you gonna share?
Yeah, I can just briefly say that so when my daughter was born, I promised her to surround her with beauty to the best of my ability. And so when we moved into our home, we together, she's 3, but we were building a flower garden in the yard, and we would watch birds and butterflies. And over the past year, our neighbors, in this effort to, we're all distant and I didn't really know people, but they would put their own flowers and plants at the end of their driveways and people would, share that way. And so you kind of got a sense of this sharing of beauty and building community through this sort of building of our own individual gardens. And then I know that kind of as we're coming out of this, the plan is to do and to build a neighborhood garden for all of us to kind of in this common space. And so it's that kind of sense of that shared in those little kind of moments, that shared beauty.
That parallel between gardens and home, we could do full shows just on that. Like when you think about things that are growing and building and coming up and what it takes to nurture them, like come on, the metaphors are too much for me. and the time that's shared in gardens, and also when we think about food and home, if we all were to think about some of the food stories that have created home for us. Y'all, part of the reason that we ask this question and that we sort of conjure up these stories of what is home for us, as we look at the fault lines piece and we go back into some of the things that cause convulsion and stuff like that in our communities, I want to make sure that I am reminding myself and everyone else of the beautiful of home, of the fact that we all have the power to create homes that feel happy and joyful and safe for ourselves and for our families. Everyone has not always had that luxury, right? And there are some who don't exist in that now, but we can work to create that for each other. That gives me hope. And maybe it's, a foolish type of hope, but I'm going to roll with it. I'll read just a couple of these others just for folks who are on Facebook who maybe can't see the comments. Renee says, home is where my heart and family love. It's abundant, where I feel safe, never judged, and always loved. Home is what our family makes. I love that. Mary Nell said, creating home is stewarding a place of hospitality and welcoming, holding space, as you say, for others to be welcome. Also included for me is stewarding the gifts of the place. Extra bedrooms to share, our beautiful gardens to cultivate. And Megan said, this isn't a comprehensive answer, but one thing that has surprised me in thinking about this question, I really value the physical curation of a place, leaving my physical mark on my space that feels like it reflects and is part of me. All very, very, and Diane said very simply, common space. All right. Is there anyone else who wanted to share their home reflection? Okay, and so we'll leave that there. Katie in the chat said, where can we find your poem written so that we can sit with the words and seek out each of the named communities? Oh, glad that you might ask, Katie. I am publishing my first. This is really strange since I've been in this game for a minute, but my first poetry book. What you can do is follow me on social media, and I'll be launching very soon and letting folks know where you can get it. It's called I Love Us, because I do. I love us, and that's what my poetry, what my work is rooted in. And I think that's a good way for me to go. And also, if you ever just want to experience the piece, the video is literally, you can go to YouTube and type in CBI Hannah Hassan. It comes right up. So it's there. It's there. So I wanted to go ahead and pass this mic on to, am I passing it to Diane?
To me.
No, Annetta.
Yeah.
And we will go from there.
All right. Thank you so much, Hannah, for facilitating this whole section. And thank you to everybody who shared about home. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that even when our time here is over, you're still going to reflect on, as you walk around your spaces, how you create home and how you can continue to leave your imprint on others, because it is a welcoming space. So we're talking about now kind of what's next. I have pasted into the chat again the resources that we wanted to share with everybody, which are the Community Building Initiative website, our Curiosity Tour, which is a walking tour that you can do with yourself or with family and friends. Also, we do a virtual bus tour. I put in the contact information to contact me if you're interested in knowing more about that. And we have heard about the 2040 plan, comprehensive plan. So there is a link to that if you have not had an opportunity to look through that website and kind of pull out the things that you want to know about it, to educate yourself, because we are hearing so much about it and need to be informed. Also, thank you, Liz, for letting us know. I'm sorry that I didn't know about your organization, Giving Impact, working in the affordable housing space. We did put in the chat also resources for housing services, and the things that people may need to create home, or if you know someone else that may be in need, please check those out. And so the last thing that I'll mention before I turn it over to Diane, or two more things I'll mention, is For those of you who joined via our registration, we're going to send you out a link. Thank you, Liz. Liz is giveimpact.org. Thank you so much. So wanted to just make sure I shouted that out. We're going to send a very short survey to you guys. It's only 4 questions because hearing from you about what we do is how we make what we do better. And so Megan has just put that into the chat, but we will also send that to you. The last thing is Diane English will close us out, but if anybody is on and would like to stick around and chat with each other for a couple more minutes after her remarks, you're welcome to do so. We will leave the link open. It will remain open just for that purpose if you would like to. So with that, another heartfelt thank you to Hannah, Hassan, and to everybody for just participating and sharing and putting your feelings and emotions into this space. So Diane English, passing the torch.
Oh, thank you. What a gift to spend time with all of you, and the names, the faces, the opportunity. And I hope you can appreciate how fortunate I feel to work each day with Annetta and Christy and Megan, and to have the gift of life being blessed by people like Hannah coming unbeknownst to me through Imam Khalil and Rahman Khan back in 2006. And who knew? And that's the beauty of all of this. We don't know. And that's the mystery of it all. So it's being open and being proximate. And that's what we're doing even in this Zoom time. So thank you for being proximate. Coming back to the couple of things Hannah said at the very beginning, we follow the stories through the fault lines. And so I'd be remiss if I didn't take us back to that, because for so many of us, either through experience or through awareness, the past year has revealed yet again things that are deep in our ground. We knew they were there. They're not a surprise. And they've been revealed in a way that we have an opportunity to look at them and acknowledge them, even if we're not sure how we address them. But acknowledgement is the first and foremost piece. And so when I heard Hannah's poem, it's never changed. All these, the names and what, the part that always brings me to my knees is when she mentions Catawba and Waxhaw and Sugar Creek and Tuckasegee, and takes us back to the origins of this country. And I'm taken back to when I first started with CBI, and I had the gift of meeting Lee Epps, and he was Lumbee. He's no longer with us, but he's always with us. And he used to say, I don't understand why those of us who were first are always last. And I live in that reality of his, because he was willing, like so many of you today, to be vulnerable and not just live in his stoic self as a businessman in Charlotte. But he claimed who he was and wanted us to honor that too. And so, that's what you did for me, Hannah. You took me back to, and Annetta and Tom, who always say, trade and try on. That was a Native American trading route. And now it's just glitzy as hell. But it started as a Native American trading route to take us places. So I commend it to you as joyful in the acknowledgement that facing some of these things can bring us freedom. And I think that's what we need more than almost anything right now, is a sense of some freedom as we confront the things that are all around us. So in the spirit of freedom, pretend you're in a room with lots of people, and you know that all the good conversations happen in a parking lot. And that's where the real stuff comes out. and you can sidle up to someone and you can, and so if you can hang around for another couple of minutes, we thought we would recreate a parking lot, or it can be the ladies' room, or it can be whatever you want in terms of just connecting with each other and just chatting. But there again, just know how much we appreciate the privilege of being with you today. And thank you, Hannah, again, for ceding space. And it's the ultimate act of hospitality to create space where we can see each other and learn how to be with each other. Thanks.
Thank you. For those of you who have to go, thank you so much for hearing me out, for experiencing this morning and sharing with us. And for anybody who wants to stay and talk, I'm gonna just say this from Lee. What that just like wrecked me. I attended something, and it was during the pandemic, and I said to myself, I will not do another show, write another poem that is performed, and I'm in control of like the event without doing a land acknowledgement. And so that piece in the poem was like me writing a land acknowledgement in it. And just thank you for mentioning that. Thank you. But I mean, if anyone has anything they want to share, say, feel free. I'm gonna mute myself.